Hello, everyone. Welcome to our virtual town hall brought to you by the Electoral Justice Project. I am your host for tonight, Titi Torres. Also here with me tonight is Carissa Lewis, Field Director for Movement for Black Lives. Tonight, we will have two different panels discussing issues that matter to you the most. The topic for our first panel, a conversation about the Black National Convention, what's moving on the ground around the nation during GOTV, and what people must know leading up to the November election. But before we get to our panel of guests, I want to kick it to Carissa Lewis, once again, Field Director for Movement for Black Lives, to give some opening remarks. Hi, Carissa.
Hey, thank you for that introduction. Hey, beloveds, my name is Carissa, and as TT named, I'm the National Field Director for the Movement for Black Lives. We're excited for this opportunity to work with The Root and y'all here at Hot 97 to host this important conversation. For those who don't know, the Movement for Black Lives is an ecosystem of over 150 Black-led and centered organizations fighting for the rights, dignity, and liberation for all Black people here and abroad. We exist because Black folks came together in response to unrelenting killings of Black people at the hands of the state in 2014 in Ferguson and across the country. And we've been working every day since in defense of Black lives. And as y'all know, this has been a devastating year for Black and brown people and all of those living on the margins of society. From the government's failed response to COVID-19 that's ravaged our communities, to the police murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and the countless Black trans women that have been killed this summer. We're experiencing state-sanctioned violence rooted in white supremacy playing out across the board. But the good news is our folks are powerful and we are going to win. We've mobilized millions of people through interventions like 619, the Black National Convention, Freedom Summer, and other dope campaigns you'll hear more about today. We're shifting the conversation about what community safety should and could look like, and we're seeing powerful electoral wins around the nation. With 28 days left until what is arguably the most consequential election in our lifetime, our work is more critical than ever, and it's going to take all of us to win. So I hope that the listeners learn about the great work happening around the nation and that you leave informed, empowered, and ready to be a part of this transformation. The collection of people that you're going to hear from are brilliant, brilliant people, and they're forging a path to liberation. And so hearing from them will definitely be a treat. And I'll kick it back to you, TT.
Carissa, thank you so much for that beautiful intro. Let's get to our panel of guests. First, let me introduce Maurice Mitchell, National Director, Working Families Party. Hello, Maurice. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
Kayla Reed, Executive Director, Action St. Louis Movement for Black Lives. Hey, Kayla, thank you for being a part of the program tonight.
Hey, TT, thanks for having me.
Michael Harriet, Senior Writer for The Root. Hi, Michael. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I love the shirt you have on tonight. Oh, you got to unmute.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. I'm sure he'll be back, guys. Let me move right along to Ashley Henderson, Co-Executive Director, Highlander Movement for Black Lives. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, TT. It's good to be here.
All right. So my first question was actually for a guy who just left, but it's okay. We'll keep it moving and hopefully he'll get back to us. So let's go to Kayla. Kayla, I want to kick off tonight's discussion with you. Why did the Movement for Black Lives host the Black National Convention, and what role did it play as a tactic in a multiple year strategy to build political power for Black people?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, the movement for Black Lives has been building power since 2014. We've seen historic wins happen in 2014, 15, 16, and each year since this ecosystem was born. And the Black National Convention was twofold. It was one, to create an intervention in a narrative around the election year. Black voters remain such an important demographic in who wins races federally, locally, and states in multiple states. And so the Black National Convention was about silencing the conversation about a two-party system and really forging on a path to talk about what Black people need, what Black people want, and to situate the folks who are working every day to make that a reality. It was a 3-hour broadcast, which folks can still see on blacknovember.org, where we talked with over 100 Black organizers across states and regions about the work that needs to happen to actually lift up what it means to defend and protect Black life, and how we pave a pathway to November that is about us and what we want to see in our communities. We're really excited about the response that we've gotten around the Black National Convention. And most importantly, we're excited that we got to put forth the amazing organizers who wake up every day thinking about Black liberation and how to transform our material conditions.
Yeah, because it really does start on the local level. And the way you guys are strategically organizing this is really amazing, because you do see the power of organization when it happens at the local level. Michael, you're back.
Yeah. I didn't know if I was on mute or not. Thank you for the compliment about the shirt, and hey, thank you for having me.
It's okay, because I have a question for you. So now that you're back, you can answer this one, okay? How has the work of movements shifted reporting and storytelling about this election? And also, I want to know, how does it differ from years past?
Right. So I think so, because I think we have finally come to realize one thing, that Black voices are important in reporting on politics. And it's not just because, you want to be inclusive or for this esoteric notion of diversity, but, we saw in this, first of all, when we look at the primaries, we saw like this entire race was going in one direction until Black people got to vote. And then we kind of chose the nominee. So, you can't talk about politics and in a two-party system without talking about the influence that Black people have, especially on the two-party system. And also, I think it's changed this narrative that we've had in reporting and in media for so long about objectivity, right? So for so long, the notion of objectivity was centered in what white people think, because, naturally it's more white people. So how they perceive the world is how, what we call objective. And I think the movement for Black Lives had a lot to do with that, right? Because, I always point out that in media before, when I worked in white media, reporters would go out and get a police report, and that would be the story of the crime. And,
and whatever they reported, people would deem them as facts.
Right. And so then we started seeing videos of what happened. Remember, Breonna Taylor police report said, she wasn't hurt in the incident at her apartment. We look at what happened during Trayvon Martin's incident, when the police came and looked and said, oh yeah, George Zimmerman, you could go home. When you looked at Mike Brown's police thing, it talked about some kind of robbery and how he was attacked. So this, now we know that this notion of objectivity is just how white people saw the police. They trusted them. They took their word for granted, and they weren't doing actual reporting. They were just reflecting the system that protects them. And I think that this election and the space that we're in now has changed all of that.
Do you see that there was a time, and I've been in radio for many years, and there was a time that when you saw the operatives, I'm talking about the higher ups that work for these Democratic parties, whether it's for the Democrats or for the Republicans or whoever, they would skip over Black media because they would deem Black media not to be as effective or as important. So you will see top line candidates not coming to Black media, not engaging in the audience. They looked at us as beneath them, like, oh, they don't come out and vote. They don't, take elections seriously. Do you see a shift in that now?
I do see a shift in that because they're trying to get to a Black audience. One of it, I don't think it was that we don't come out and vote. I think as someone who reports, I think one thing that people don't know is that Black people do vote, right? In the South, in the reddest states, Black voters in Mississippi and South Carolina and Alabama outvote white voters. The voter turnout and the voter participation in southern states are higher than the white participation. And so it was never that Black people didn't vote. And I see that shifting in small ways. I don't think it's where it needs to be yet, because I still think that they treat Black media as de facto press agents, and then still take the news and the scoops and the reporting to white media. So I think a lot of that needs to change. We'll get press releases, and they'll come on and do something and they always, like, they'll send us a surrogate that's Killer Mike or T.I., and then they'll send their policy advocates to, white media, who sometimes, and a lot of times, have smaller markets than than Black owned media and Black media.
Yeah. I see you shaking your head over there. You want to jump in?
I think that one of the things I find the most frustrating, being from the South, a proud Southerner, is that we come from a long heritage of people who have been fighting for the right to vote and then exercising the right to vote for centuries. We are the inheritors of a long legacy of resistance that included voting. And so I think that it's just a misnomer, the idea that Black people don't vote. And I want to even hone in a little bit more, is that Black women particularly get this right.
Yes, I was just about to say that, Ashley. Black women show up in droves. And what we're going to do, we're going to call our nephew, we're going to call our cousin who just got a probation, get your papers right. We're going to push people to get out there and exercise their right to vote. So, Ashley, I wanted to ask you, since I have you, is how did the event impact the mainstream narrative about Black electoral power and the election?
Oh my God, I love this question, TT. Thank you. I mean, one, I'd have to say that, like, it was literally the implementation of a deep and abiding love for Black people that Kayla Reed and Rukia Lumumba and Jessica Bird and Jam and Carmen, all the incredible folks, Michelle, that made this thing happen. Like, Black women literally pulled off this incredible intervention, the first Black National Convention that's happened since 1972. And I would say, like, as a person who got to participate in it, that wasn't a part of the planning, like, what it meant for Black people in my state, the great state of Tennessee, was that people who typically didn't even always get to talk to one another got to build political power with one another. We got to talk about our plans for our states. And that happened across the country, right? We engaged millions of people over the process. And I think that why that matters, right, is that, one, it showed the world that Black people actually do have political platforms. We have demands. They are not impossible to achieve. What we saw is that young people actually aren't just, ignoring elections. We are actively engaged in talking about how to build multi-tactical strategies to do this work. And I'm not just talking about Black people with degrees. I hear Fannie Lou Hamer in my head on her birthday being like, what, you got a PhD or no D? We in this bag together. And so we had formerly incarcerated people. We had folks that got college degrees. Everybody was in this thing together. And so I think what Kayla and the comrades have been able to prove is that we actually are about the business of winning. We are about the business of putting forward our demands, what we deserve, not just what we would concede to. And we're actually about the work of governance, y'all. Like, really, truly believe that Black people can govern.
There is this notion, and we saw this early on before Biden was won the primary vote. We saw this notion that Black folks, it's something wrong if we demand more, when historically Black folks have been the number one supporter of the Democratic Party. Where do you think that notation, that narrative comes from, that we shouldn't demand more?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the story usually gets told in a way that makes it seem like we're voting for a savior, not a target. And what we're actually doing is holding someone accountable who made promises to our people about implementing the policy demands that have come from our folks, right? And so I think that it's going to be really, really critical for us to get out. It's probably going to be even more important for us to be out in the first 100 days. We got to get out the vote. We got to defend our democracy, and we've got to make sure that in the first 100 days of a new administration that we're doing everything in our power to win things like the Breathe Act and the Red, Black, and Green New Deal and the Thrive Agenda and the People's Charter from the Working Families Party. There's so much more for us to be doing because we can't sit on our laurels and be like, woo, okay, we got another white savior in the White House, and that's the end of the story. That's not the end goal. And I think that's why the Electoral Justice Project of the Movement for Black Lives and the Working Families Party have come together to build things like the Frontline. There's a 12-month campaign to make sure that Black people win. And what we know is in this country is when Black people win electoral justice, when Black people win progressive policies, that everybody benefits, right? So this is a movement led by Black people, but it's also leading a multiracial, multi-class, multi-geography, multi-sector movement to defend and protect democracy.
Yeah. And I'm sorry we hear some banging in the background, but I don't know who. Somebody must be moving in a new apartment, hanging up some pictures or something. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's Zoom, everybody. So we got to just work around wherever that banging is coming from. So anyone could jump in on this, Maurice or.
Sure. I'd love to jump in. And there's a few things. So I think the way that you framed it is right. So we're at the tail end of what I consider to be a Black political renaissance. And it didn't just begin today. It didn't just begin this summer. The work that we've been doing, many of our comrades all around the country in the Movement for Black Lives, organizing day in and day out in Black communities, and not simply protesting and demanding, but also being very clear about the policies that we want on the community level all the way up until Congress. That work has been happening for years. So as a result, now you see, for folks who live in the Bronx, WFP champion Jamal Bowman will be a congressperson. Or folks in St. Louis, Cori Bush, who was on the front lines as a protester in St. Louis, will be a congressperson. And folks like Charles Booker, who came very close but didn't make it. Nobody thought he would come anywhere near there, and it's our movements that delivered that. And so there's something that is taking place that's outside of the two-party system and outside of the Democrats. Like, we've been talking a lot about the Democratic Party. I'm the national director of an independent party called the Working Families Party. For those, Hot 97, a big part of your audience is in New York. In New York, the Working Families Party has a ballot link. Right? Yeah. So you go in the booth, you could vote on the Working Families Party line. And we've endorsed, and I want to be clear, we've endorsed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, not because we believe in the candidates, but because we believe in ourselves and our movements. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, that's not the destination. They're a door. And we pass through that door in order to organize every single day after Election Day for all of the issues and all of the values that we talk about. And so when you're able to vote on the Working Families Party line in New York, you can aggregate all of our votes, and we don't get lost in the Democratic sauce. And then come after Election Day, we could take that leverage and pressure those elected officials on our agenda. That is the non-delusional third-party, independent Black political power strategy that all of us need to be investing in. And I've heard a lot of people say, the Democratic Party is a plantation, and the Democratic Party takes Black people for granted.
There's a lot of people that feel that way, particularly Black men. I've spoken to a lot of Black men who are so fed up with the Democrat Party, who's not feeling Biden because of the effects of his crime bill. And I myself have often treated my position as a voter as the independent. And that's how I feel a lot of us should look at the political system. But that's how I view it.
Yeah, and I want to say something further about that. Now, there's two directions often that people go there. They either try to organize Black people to absenteeism, which is don't vote at all, or to the Republican Party, which is the party of white supremacy. Now, I don't get that. Now, if you're saying the Democratic Party has taken us for granted, yeah, point well taken. The Democratic Party is not aligned with our values. Okay, now let's build an independent Black power building strategy, independent Black independent organizations, using tools like the Working Families Party, which is an independent political organization led by Black people, that is a multiracial organization that is building across the country electoral. And it's not just theoretical. We're winning elections up and down the ballot. There's a reason why people don't want you to know about the work that's happening at the Electoral Justice Project of the Movement for Black Lives, or the work that we've been doing for the past few years, the Working Families Party, because then people will understand that the two-party system isn't as rigid as we think it is.
Yeah.
And we can actually build power outside of the two-party system and actually win and have Congress people and have city council people and have mayors who are aligned with our values and are part of
and
that.
Pushing our agendas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can I jump in? I would say, when we talk about November, what I've been lifting up is that this is not a conversation or an election about candidates. This is about conditions. This is about opportunities on the pathway to November and beyond that allow our really big ideas to take center stage. The Black National Convention was about those big ideas, that we can't talk about climate justice absent a racial justice lens. We can't talk about policing without understanding its history that's deeply embedded in white supremacy. We can't talk about COVID without talking about housing and the economic impact and how that is going to be disproportionate in our communities and impacting our families. And so for us, November is a lot about the conditions that become possible when we shift the landscape and we shift the context. This is not the North Star. Our liberation is never going to be staked in the person that lives on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. But the things that we can organize around when we change the conditions, that's what's happening on the local level. The Democrats didn't want Cori Bush to win. They didn't want Jamal Bowman to win. That work came from local grassroots organizers and organizations that have been tilling the soil and planting new ideas and new seeds that are going to bear new fruit. So we have to do the thing in the now and keep thinking beyond that. And what we are trying to do as movement is connect voting. We call it electoral justice because it's the strategy that's connected to beyond the day that you go vote or beyond the day that you go forward. It's layered, it's interconnected, it's intertwined. And when we move on all cylinders, policy, communications, local organizing, national political parties, we can actually start to build something that feels like Black-led governance, which is what we want to see in this moment.
Yeah. To piggyback off of that, I would like to know what is the current status of voter engagement and in registration numbers around the country? Who wants to answer that?
Well, people are voting.
Yeah.
Every day is election day until November 3rd. And so your state, your registration deadline is coming up. Missouri's, if you're listening from Missouri, it's on Wednesday, it's tomorrow. You can request your absentee ballots, learn the rules that are in your state. You can follow M4BL, the Movement for Black Lives, on Instagram and Twitter. We're constantly putting out content. You should follow the Working Families Party, constantly putting out content. I'm a member of the Working Families Party. And I think that this type of, what we are seeing is that people are voting and they understand what's at stake. They understand that we now have someone who is literally holding hostage COVID relief until after the election, that the Supreme Court has said they want to roll back the ability for me to marry my partner because we are queer, that there is so much at stake. And there's so much potential on the other side of it that we're not just defending what we've already won, we're winning new things.
Yeah. We continue fighting for the changes. Yeah.
Policies, right. And so we have to be able to do both. And people are voting. I think we're going to see high numbers. As a local organizer, we've already seen high numbers. When Cori Bush won in August, we passed Medicaid expansion in a Republican state. That's because we do the deep organizing of knocking on the folks' door. We're not subscribing to a strategy of spending time to talk to people who don't see our humanity. We're talking to our people. We're building our base and we're winning.
Yeah. So, Marie, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to piggyback and add on that what we're seeing nationally is that not just registrations, but people have already started voting. They are participating in higher numbers than even during the time of Barack Obama. Part of that is because we can see it in real time now, with the absentee ballots and the mail-in voting. And they, I think it's important to echo what everyone else has said here is that, like, we're not just voting. We're not really just voting for a president. If we're going to defund the police, it's not going to come from Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. It's going to come from city councilmen and state.
You're jumping ahead with that word.
If we're going to make a change in the criminal justice system, if we're going to change the laws that affect us the most, it's going to be on the local local and the state levels. And that's the most important part about voting. Because even if Trump wins, if we go out and vote in mass and change our state legislatures and our city council people, there's a lot that he won't be able to do just as president.
Yeah.
What's really, if he go vote, he won't win in the first place, right? And I think that's what's so beautiful about what we're seeing is we've already seen 26 million people in the street over the last 100 days, right? In every state in the United States since George Floyd was murdered, we've seen people protesting. People are going out and vote. They've already gotten their mail-in ballots. They've already sent them back, right? We're seeing people continue to be engaged and take a step further, right? We're seeing people massively commit to volunteering, to text everybody that they know to get them to go vote. We're seeing folks like actually get trained up about what does it look like to be a poll worker or a poll watcher, right? We have a whole community of folks across this country that are saying enough is enough and putting their own work, their own resources into making sure that this election happens and that it happens in a way where Black voters actually get counted.
Yeah. Maurice, I want to ask you this. How are communities actually talking about voting right now?
Well, I mean, one of the things that we're hearing on the ground, and I think this, like what Ashley said is so true. It predated this moment. So in the summer where people were hitting the streets for justice, that enthusiasm, that drive in order to transform our communities is still real. You have to remember that we're still in a moment of COVID. We're still experiencing, for everyday working class and poor folks, we're experiencing depression level economics, right? There's people who are suffering under COVID-19 and the secondary economic impacts and psychological impacts and health impacts of this pandemic. Like we're also experiencing police violence. We're also, many of us, recognizing that we're about to approach climate calamity. So all of these things is so clear to everybody on the ground. When our folks are hitting people in the community, texting people, talking to people, the level of enthusiasm is through the roof. So you would have thought that in a pandemic, voter turnout would have gone down. But like Kayla said, in state after state after state, and we're in a number of states, in all of those primaries, we saw record numbers of people for the first time mailing in their ballots or dropping their ballots in ballot boxes. So to me, what we're experiencing to me is a rare opportunity where the grassroots are alive. And this election is going to be a referendum on Black lives. This election is going to be a referendum on that structural change agenda that so many people desire, a referendum on not just dealing with COVID and repairing the systems that brought us there, but building new systems that are more resilient than the ones that failed us. And so our people are clear. And what they're attempting to do on TV is to sow cynicism, despair, because they know that if people are afraid, if people are cynics, if people feel despair, they'll be less likely to vote. They'll be less likely to organize. And I want to be clear, this is about voting and this is about electoral justice. But one of the innovations that the Movement for Black Lives has made with the term electoral justice is that it's not just about voting. Voting on election day is one activity. But to be fully engaged in democracy, you need to protest, you need to vote, you need to find a local organization and organize. You need to, if you're part of a union, use your labor power and strike or do work stoppages. You need to work with independent political organizations and find a political home like the Working Families Party or the Movement for Black Lives. All of those things are part of having a robust democracy. And they win when we feel like we as individuals don't have the power. And the last thing, and this is something that Michael brought up, right? It's not just about presidential politics. Barack Obama won twice and his party lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures. It has to be about voting up and down the ballot, judges, city council, all the way up. And this is our opportunity to shift things in a different direction. And then after election day, we have to stay engaged, because the thing that Democrats and Republicans would love for us to do is after election day, after we padded their vote total so that they could win, we go home. So that
we go back to sleep. They think they can rock us back to sleep.
Exactly. And so it's going to be incumbent on us to stay engaged post-election day, which is one of the things that Working Families Party and the Electoral Justice Project is partnering with the Movement for Black Lives and the Frontline to create a container that takes people from right now to election day and then post-election day based on our issues. It always has to be about the Black agenda, not simply Black votes. So for far too long, political actors have been hungry, thirsty for Black votes, But then when it comes to the Black agenda, they don't
They
want
go
to
to sleep.
about it.
Yeah, they wipe their hands of it.
Exactly. So we're doing something to change that. That starts with us. Starts with us mobilizing past election day.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that like movement is going to be here before the election, on election day, and well after. So people should definitely follow, join the Movement for Black Lives, become a member of the Working Families Party, plug into the long-term work. There's so much that you can do on your own, and then find other people who think the same and do that work. We're only going to win if we build the necessary collective to do so.
Yeah, and just like we saw with Stacey Abrams in Georgia and how we saw Barack Obama, a lot of that work started grassroots, concrete jungle. A lot of that work started locally and then had a trickle down effect. So we always have to keep that in mind. I know we have to get to our second panel, but Michael, I just have one last question for you, and you can sum this up. How is the media working to combat misinformation about this election?
Well, I think you see a lot of organizations, the NAACP, the Legal Defense Fund. You see the Movement for Black Lives. You see a lot of movements trying to get the information out that is state specific, that is location specific to voters on how they're going to target your vote, how they're going to target your absentee ballots, and how to do it right. And so it's not just about voting. It's about, as everyone mentioned, organizing these efforts to combat the disinformation, and Black media is a part of that, right? Like, you don't know what's going on in St. Louis if you're in Chicago unless you know where to look, because everybody else is talking about, oh, Trump got COVID, right? But people are still getting shot in the streets. People are still losing their homes. People are still catching COVID disproportionately in Black communities. And the only way to know that is to look for Black people who will tell you about the things that are happening in Black communities.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining this part of our discussion today. You all have been such an amazing panel of guests. I can't express enough how much I appreciate you guys for taking the time out to be with us today. This brings us to an end of our first panel. Carissa, I believe, is joining us back. We have a second panel lined up for you guys. Hi, Carissa.
Hey.
How are you? Everybody, if you're just tuning in, Carissa Lewis is the field director for Movement for Black Lives. Carissa, we just wrapped up our first panel. Any closing thoughts on it?
Yeah, excited to be a part of a team that's thinking about what's the long-term arc. I think what Mo lifted up is really important to reiterate, and I think Kayla spoke to this as well. Voting is one piece of a larger strategy, and we have to be committed to that full process, to that full strategy. And there's lots of folks in this chat who got a lot of opinions about who is advocating for us and why, and how we need to be showing up in November. And what I'm clear about is I'm voting for the terrain in which I want to organize on. And so to me, the options are pretty crystal clear. And we're excited to continue to be in conversation with folks about it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You're going to hang around for a little bit, right?
Yeah, I'll be here, boo.
Okay. All right. So welcome, everyone, to part 2 of our discussion tonight. I am your host, TT Torres. And of course, you just heard from Carissa Lewis, field director for Movement for Black Lives. And joining us for part 2 of this discussion is our group of panelists, Danielle Belton, editor-in-chief, The Root. Hello. Oh, are they not here? Okay. Phil Agnew, co-founder of Black Men Build. Did I say that? Did I say your last name correctly? Because I've been practicing that. I've been practicing that last name all day.
You hit it out the park.
And Chantrice Martin, Black Lives Matter, Louisville, and Black Market Leader Distributor. Hi.
Hey.
How are you? Oh, I love that shirt, girl. Protect a Black woman at all costs. And we have Dean Steed, Solutions, Not Punishment. How are you today?
Hey, doing good. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. Danielle, is that you joining us in here?
Yes, that is me.
How are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you.
Good. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for being here tonight. A few weeks has passed since we got the devastating decision in the Breonna Taylor case. The nation is still reeling from the impact. Phil, I want to kick off with you. I want to kick this session off with you tonight. And, there has been a lot of conversations surrounding Breonna Taylor's case. We saw the grand jury step up and ask that the transcripts be released. I want to get your thoughts on how this organization is trying to end violence against Black Americans.
Yeah, so Movement for Black Lives, as you probably already heard, is an umbrella, a network of over 150 different organizations involved in work at every step of what we would call the oppression of Black people, poor people in the country. And so when you look at the murder of Breonna Taylor, there are a lot of things that converge. One, absolutely, is the way that this country treats Black women, treats Black people. The other is the war on drugs, right? That we know was never about safety, was never about rehabilitation, but has always been about the destruction of the Black community. We also see police overreach and police just frankly brutality, right? And so at the core of each one of these issues is a systemic issue, right? And so the Movement for Black Lives provides the scaffolding, provides direction, provides coordination, provides amplification, provides connection for people on the ground to be able to amplify and magnify the impact of their work, because we know all of this happens locally. We have a sister on from Louisville, right? The impact, there are times where this story might not have even caused a ripple, right? But because of the infrastructure that we've been able to build through collaboration together, we're able to make sure that a story that may not have ever gotten the light of day is now on the tip of everybody's tongue, from the NBA to the NFL to lawmakers, et cetera. And so that, to me, InfraBL's power is in the ability to magnify what was once an invisible thing, what was once a thing that was whispered, and make sure that it has become a rallying cry for the entire country and really the world.
Yeah, because up until this point, there was no accountability in terms of the media in different areas, basically reporting, I would say, not so true facts about cases, covering up murders pretty much. And you see now with these movements on the ground, they can't hide behind those false police reports anymore. Right. No. They can't hide behind what someone did in their past to justify why they killed our people. So it's really the people on the ground, the concrete jungle, who are putting in the work to shed light on the injustices that happens every day to our people. And that's so important, because if we didn't have this infrastructure, just think about how many cases will go unseen and unheard. And so many have, you know?
Well, I don't want to talk too much, but it's many times we were the David in a fight with a Goliath. They had the media, they had the police, they had the Fraternal Order of Police, they had every manner of thing on their side, and so we need each other to be organized in order to go up against an organized opposition.
Chantrice, I want to I'm sorry, not Chantrice. Danielle, I want to kick it to you. The central demand has been to defund the police, right? What exactly does defund the police mean? And has this demand evolved over time?
Well, when I hear the term defund the police, I think about taking money away from policing that is harmful towards our communities, towards our individuals, and putting that money towards real solutions to problems in our community. The reality is the police are not equipped to deal with things like if you're having a mental health issue or you're having a distress call. Like the police are a hammer and nail situation. They treat every problem if it's a nail. They go with the most extreme response. And a lot of times that ends up with people losing their lives at the hands of these same police officers. The reality is, up until basically recently, crime had been down largely all across America. The fact that we were pumping so much money into policing and militarizing the police during pretty much a relatively peaceful time in American history is really appalling, because what we really need in solutions to crime are solutions, are community-based solutions to poverty, solutions to education, solutions to mass incarceration. We don't necessarily need more policing. And so when I hear the term defund the police, to me, it's really more about like taking the resources that is needed to reinvest in our communities and build them up and make things safer and better for our communities. That's what that term means to me.
Yeah. There is still some people who are confused by the messaging, right?
Mhm.
And it still scares some folks, particularly white folks, to be honest with you. What is the real goal of defund the police? We talk about reinvesting money into communities, reinvesting into mental health, in taking away some of the things that pretty much really isn't necessary. But can you break that down a bit more? Because I think what people are confused about, oh, if I call 911, they won't be there. They won't pick up the phone for me.
Well, I mean, let's be real here. Like, the police statistically don't actually solve most crime. Like, the number one job the police are supposed to do, which is solve crime, statistically they do not do.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to reimagine policing altogether. The way that policing is done in this country does not work. What we have is a system that penalizes and is punitive towards people of color, as if we are just born criminals and need to be treated as such, as opposed to a system that's actually meant to help people. The reality is a lot of people have bought into the propaganda. I mean, to be honest, like, if you watch, there's so many cop procedural shows on television that teach you that the police, actually solve crime and are helpful towards you. That if you go to the police as a rape victim, for example, that they will actually process your rape kit and look for your rapist. That does not happen
At all.
It does not happen in this country. So we need to rethink this whole thing. So it's like, you can say like, oh, we can try to retrain people. How does retraining help someone who already is predisposed to racism?
Mhm.
Yeah. Chantrese, can you jump in here?
Yeah, I get asked that same question a lot by reporters who really don't care about revolution and don't care about changing the status quo. For me, I was assaulted on campus, and I remember campus police, we called them, and they tried to convince me that it was my mistake, that I didn't understand the relationship between me and the person who assaulted me. So when people talk about defunding police and the anarchy that they imagine, that fear is just a way to skirt around talking about race. We have had reform. We have lived reform. What we're in now is reform. The body cameras, the training for diversity, all those sorts of things are the reform. And the reform does not work because it is simply recreating the status quo and giving white supremacy an excuse to continue the same norms and procedures that force us to have to fight for women like Breonna Taylor.
Mm-hmm. Hold that, stay right there, Chantrese, because I want to piggyback off that question. So the uprising we see now, it has been like no other, right? State violence is the tie that binds everything here. Mm-hmm. How has this moment shifted the narrative about the role of state?
Yeah, one big thing that we've seen because of COVID, because of people just not being able to go and do anything, there aren't distractions. People cannot simply ignore Black people's plight. People cannot simply ignore the injustices and the overwhelming statistics that Black women are less likely to get justice when acts of violence occur. So there aren't these distractions. The NFL wasn't around. The NBA wasn't around. There weren't ways for people to check out. You had no choice but to check in and stay tuned in. Similarly, places like Movement for Black Lives have been the manifestation of the coalition building, right? Keeping folks connected, making sure we in Louisville know what's going on in California and beyond, and coming together, understanding that we have to be abolitionists in this time. We cannot simply sit back and wait for politicians who don't come from our communities to act on our behalf, because they will always compromise first rather than making sure we are taken care of. So that has been the real big difference for us in this uprising. And people are tired. They said that, if we are good Negroes, if we go to school, if we get a job, if we are not in the streets, we don't have anything to worry about. But Breonna Taylor was all those things. And there was nothing that they could say. They tried to play her and disrespect her name by saying she was a drug kingpin, right? But there's nothing they could say about Breonna Taylor that justifies why she was killed in her home, right? And so
when people justify the killing of unarmed Black people in this country, they say, oh, they were a drug dealer. They did this bad thing. They were tardy for school one time when they were 16, but there's nothing you could say. And I think people are finally starting to wake up.
Yeah. Yeah, Danielle, I want to kick it back to you. Can you speak to shifts in coverage of issues around state violence, and also have newsrooms taken up the charge to call out systemic racism and oppression internally?
Well, I will say this, as someone who's worked in media for, oh my God, almost 20 years. I hate to date myself. I'm old.
You started when you was 20.
Exactly.
Exactly.
I started when I was 1. So in newsrooms, by and large, when I worked in predominantly white newsrooms, they would just often, if the case involved the police, after the police said, this was the report, this is the report, we have to report it this way, this is what the police said, where you just completely just take for granted, you just assume that the police are acting in good faith at all times. Now, that didn't mean that those newsrooms always believed the police. There were plenty of times where we were often the only check as a local newspaper on community policing. One of the cities that I worked in was Bakersfield, California, which is known for its hardcore, very red wing, very conservative policing. They're very much a shoot first, we'll figure it all out later type of private place. And the newspaper was really the only check on that. And so and I was the only Black person working at the newspaper at the time. And so a lot of newsrooms kind of like dealt with this quandary where they knew that the police could sometimes exaggerate. They knew they could embellish things. They knew they could try to twist things into their favor, but they wouldn't necessarily report on it. They would talk around the issue. They would find different language to kind of dress it up. That's why you have language like police involved shooting, as opposed to the police shot and killed someone.
Right.
Because police involved shooting like takes some of the pressure off of the police department, off of the officer themselves who have committed a crime. And I feel like things are shifting in the media. Like you do now see, even in the mainstream press now, more and more reporters questioning the story first when it comes out from whatever the police say. But we still have a long way to go. The reality is most of these are local stories. They're happening in Louisville. They're happening in my hometown of St. Louis. They're happening in Oakland. And you're dealing with local reporters on the ground who are the first people to get the story. And often what they report will dictate if the story goes national, a lot of that reportage. So it's really important for things to change on a local level, not just a national level, and how people approach these stories.
Yeah. Dean, I want to kick it to you. How are you tonight?
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Good. So the narrative around Trump being the issue has shifted significantly. Now more people are naming that he's a system, and racism and white supremacy. He's a symptom, and racism and white supremacy that are perpetrated. Can I talk tonight? Through various forms of state violence is the illness. What role have movement organizations played in that shift?
I think that what people are noticing is that under Trump's administration, we're still facing the same challenges that we were facing under Obama's administrations and administrations that predated him. So I think what people are seeing and feeling the impacts of these challenges, where we are actually not really seeing any type of new solutions. And I think particularly on the ground, people have really done the work. I know in Atlanta, we've been doing a lot of work on the ground. And earlier you were talking about the impacts of COVID and the protests in this moment. And Georgia is a state where our governor refused to accept federal funds to expand Medicaid. And so you have a state in which people are feeling the impacts of not having health care and being felt by our health institutions. And you have a state where minimum wage is $9 an hour, and people are economically frustrated, especially in a pandemic where people have lost jobs. And so what we're seeing is the collective frustration at a lack of any type of safety net, at any type of social welfare and programs to help people during this situation, but still seeing police receive incredible funding in this time.
Chantrice, how do we begin to even allocate for those resources? Just like he said, we see so many families struggling with COVID-19 mentally and don't have the resources to afford a counselor, that safety net that most rich people have. You know, people who are not of a certain income level just don't have those luxuries. They have to go out there and work at COVID in a pandemic in order to put food on the table.
Yeah, I mean, we're as a people navigating a multiplicity of traumas, generational traumas, individual traumas, while we're trying to fight for freedom. So it makes you feel like there is no end to it, but this cycle for us is not just about in this moment, it's about moving forward. And one thing we've noticed is that we are able to create our own sort of framework for what healing looks like. Part of that healing is defunding police. Here in Louisville, the police budget is more than $190 million. So we created a framework for once defunded, what does that look like? What does this new world look like? Part of that means getting some of these dilapidated houses and turning them into sustainable places for single mothers to live. That means we're buying property. It also means that we are calling on our mental health professionals who can afford it to give us free therapy, free counseling, having medics on the ground, having people who are trained in de-escalation and conflict resolution and non-traditional healing strategies, because traditionally Black women specifically, but Black people in general, are not listened to and catered to when it comes to the medical field. And we are told that our pain is imaginary. So for us, it looks like internal healing. It looks like us reaching out to each other, groups like Movement for Black Lives that have those lists of resources, and disseminating that and destigmatizing the need to heal in these moments where we feel like we have to act right now. And it is imperative for us to do that, because white supremacy is always going to try to recreate itself better and stronger. And it is only through a rigorous attack on white supremacy that is consistent and is based in healing that we can get to that other side.
That's deep. Whew, I love that. Okay, so Danielle, I want to kick it back to you. What role has the Black press and others covering this movement played in moving the nation into a deeper conversation about systemic racism here in America?
The Black press has historically always played a crucial role in these stories. The Black press is an activist, an advocacy, an advocate for the African American community. We've always operated with a conscience and with an awareness of what our situation is. We've never taken for granted, like, we don't have the luxury of saying like, oh, we have to hear both sides. What's both sides to racism? You know, like it seems crazy. So like the Black press has always pushed you can go back as far as, you know, Ida B. Wells and her campaign against lynching. You could talk about how the Black press covered Emmett Till. You could talk about how the Black press covered Rodney King. It goes on and on. Like, we've been out in the forefront, beating the drum, making people aware of what is going on in the world around them and how to best suit themselves, how to best protect themselves, how to best advocate for themselves and to create change. That is our role. Our role is to inform and to get people to the level where they need to be in order to act on the information that they have. And so I see us as still doing it. The Root does it every day.
Yeah. And how does our social media influence play in that as well?
Social media is a game changer. I mean, when you think about when the civil rights movement was going on in the 1950s and 60s, it was 3 TV networks. And so the fact that the civil rights movement dominated those 3 TV networks was amazing, but you were still just only getting the news through a very filtered source. It was very white, it was very male, it was very much, you know, the status quo. As like, what's the game changer is that social media has created is a democratization of the media. Now everyone has a chance to have an amplified voice. Somebody who you may have never heard of, who might be everything from a librarian to a custodian, could write a fire tweet, take the right video, get the right photo, and blow the whole thing wide open. Like, we have to utilize these platforms. And the reality is, like, we have as a people, we overrepresent on many of these social media platforms. Black people dominate on Twitter. We, you know, dominate on Facebook. Like we've made some of these platforms.
Well,
Like,
Black Twitter is a real thing. It's
Black
Yeah.
Twitter is real. What would these platforms be without us? So of course,
our coolness, because we make them cool.
we make it lit. Like that's what we do. We make everything pop. And so the fact that we've been able to take this tool that was not invented for us, like the people who created Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, they weren't thinking about Black people when they made these things. But we have taken something and we have flipped it and we have turned it into, literally like, Chuck D would say, like the hip hop was, Black people CNN. I would say social media. Yeah. Black Twitter is now Black people's CNN. So,
Dean, this question is for Dean and Phil. How are you guys using the social platforms to engage with Black men, to encourage mental health and the things that Chantrice and Danielle was speaking about earlier, and reaching out to these men? Either one can take it first. Dean, you wanna?
Yeah. So SNAPCO, we're actually a Black, trans, and queer organization, and so a lot of the work that we do around mental health is not solely focused on Black men, but we're also trying to reach Black, cis, and trans men, trans masculine folks, queer folks, and gender non-conforming people. And especially in this moment, we've definitely tried to do so by supporting more art, queer community and trans communities. Culturally, we've often been involved in the arts and use arts as a healing method. And so really trying to invest in Atlanta Black, queer, trans artists who are doing work in any kind of way, and being able to invest in those opportunities for folks and to encourage more of our folks to be involved in doing things that support their mental health.
Yeah. Phil?
This year has been a reckoning, I think, on a lot of different fronts. If you're a Black man, I don't understand and I don't know how you couldn't hear the call this year, not only in cases that are particularly egregious, like the murder of Breonna Taylor, but having hours and hours on end to reflect and to look inside. And so what we've done with Black Men Build is really use Zoom. It's driving us crazy, but Zoom, Instagram Live, Facebook groups, phone conversations, all with the express purpose of building spaces where Black men can come. We say, come as you are, grow as you go. That this year requires for Black men to transform to meet the moment, that the way that we've been taught about masculinity as cold, as not emotional, as numbed out, as not connected to other people, is once sold to us by the oppressor, that it requires, this moment requires, and many previous moments have required. But now we're in a time where we've got to really come together and stand 10 toes down in the movement, as we've seen all other identities and across the diaspora and across the representation of Blackness. And so for us, the importance of social media is immeasurable, because it just gives us the opportunity to connect with people that we couldn't at the barbershop or on the corner or any of these places where Black men congregate. And this has just been an incredible year. I know I see a lot of social media conversations about where Black men have gone wrong. And I think we've got to acknowledge that that is a truth. And I think this year I've been a part of a great number of spaces with Black men who have now begun to look inside in a way that they haven't been forced to do before. And I've really, really committed to making the transformation and the change. And some people would say because we hit rock bottom. But the fact of the matter is this is a reckoning and this is an undoing. And if we come out of 2021 the same way we came into 2020, we are losing. And I think a lot of Black men have recognized that. And I'm proud to be a part of it and be transformed in the service of the work, as Mary Hook says.
Yeah. So I know we're coming to an end of this discussion, but before we wrap up, I do want to ask you, Chantrice, what's the next stop on the road to ending state violence?
Yeah, for us, we continue to push an abolitionist mindset. We continue to say defund the police department that killed Breonna Taylor, along with a lot of our other unarmed brothers and sisters and gender nonconforming folks. For us, it is about clicking up and staying clicked up, staying on Daniel Cameron's ass, excuse my language, and all of those who continue to perpetrate this system of violence that has historically never benefited us and only bamboozled us. And you can get in touch with Black Lives Matter Louisville, hit us up on Twitter and all that. We really want folks who are ready to move this work in whatever way you have the capacity so we can heal and fight.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for taking the time out to really talk to our audience and to really inform them of all the great things that you guys are doing on the ground. So we really do appreciate each and every one of you who checked in with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Much love.
So before we end tonight, Carissa, I want your final thoughts. What can we do to ensure that whoever takes office after this election makes a commitment to addressing systemic racism and state violence?
Yeah, so, today, as somebody mentioned, is Fannie Lou Hamer's birthday. And she named explicitly that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so the only way that we move out of that condition is by organizing. And as Phil named, Mary Hooks out of Southerners on New Ground gave us a mandate. And so I want to leave y'all with the mandate. And so the mandate for Black people in this time is to avenge the suffering of our ancestors. It's to earn the respect of future generations. And it's to be willing to be transformed in the service of the work. And so that's what we have to be up to together, beloveds. We have to be ready to be transformed in the service of the work. We have to be ready to earn the respect of future generations. And we have to understand that this is a protracted struggle. We are in a long lineage of freedom fighters, rebel rousers, and we will continue to do that work.
Yes. And if people want to get involved, can you give out a website, social media handles, please?
Yep. If folks are interested in following the Movement for Black Lives, you can follow us on all social media platforms. If you're interested in engaging our electoral arm, I encourage you to shoot over to blacknovember.org. And we amplify the work of all of our organizations. So you can catch BLM Louisville, you can catch Black Men Build, you can catch Action St. Louis. So follow us on all our platforms.
Thank you. Once again, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And I want to thank you via YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're watching, on your phone, on your laptop, on your TV, hooked up to some device. Thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate you so much. And once again, everybody, thank you for joining the conversation. It's a wrap. We're done. Woo! Good night, everybody.
Thank y'all.